Mr. President. Mr. President, let me start by congratulating you and the delegation of Mozambique on a very successful presidency of the Security Council. Mr. President, we thank you for organizing this important debate on the protection of civilians in armed conflict, and we thank the briefers for their thoughtful insights. Mr. President, it is 25 years since the Security Council commenced consideration of the protection of civilians in armed conflicts. This year is also the 75th anniversary of the Geneva Conventions, which made explicit the protections for civilians in conflict zones. It is therefore with outrage that we witness the wanton war being waged for the past 7 months against helpless Palestinian civilians in Gaza. 35,000 mostly innocent women and children have been killed by the Israeli war machine in this brutal campaign. 2 million Gazans have been displaced repeatedly. Humanitarian supplies have been deliberately blocked, humanitarian workers targeted and killed, hospitals, schools, and infrastructure destroyed, and UNRWA, the only UN agency fully capable of providing relief to the besieged Gazans, has been deliberately defamed and attacked. Famine and pestilence stalk Gaza. Mr. President, this plausible genocide, as termed by the International Court of Justice, will forever remain a blot on the world's conscience. It will haunt the perpetrators of this slaughter. It has sullied the reputation of those who were complicit in the Israeli crimes by offering impunity to the extremist Israeli leadership. The prosecutor of the International Criminal Court has sought arrest warrants, including for 2 of Israel's leaders. This will be a test case for the credibility of the ICC. Mr. President, it is difficult to build protections for civilians when their suppression, exclusion, and expulsion is the very object of a military campaign. As in Palestine, a pervasive campaign of oppression has been underway for decades in occupied Jammu and Kashmir, executed by an army of 900,000 troops acting with complete impunity to impose what is ominously called a final solution for the Kashmir dispute. Over 100,000 Kashmiris have been killed. 13,000 young Kashmiri boys have been abducted, and many of them mercilessly tortured. All those Kashmiri leaders seeking freedom and self-determination for the people of Jammu and Kashmir, as prescribed by the several resolutions of this Security Council, all of them have been incarcerated. Many of these political leaders have died in custody under suspicious circumstances. Extrajudicial killings continue. Collective punishments are frequent. Mr. President, Pakistan has submitted a dossier to the United Nations with evidence of 2,800 cases of crimes committed by Indian officials against Kashmiri civilians in occupied Jammu and Kashmir. the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and more than a dozen special rapporteurs of the Human Rights Council have expressed deep concern regarding the massive violations of human rights in occupied Jammu and Kashmir and sought investigations. All their requests for access to the occupied territory have been denied. Mr. President, it is imperative for the Security Council and other United Nations bodies to redress such violations, to end foreign occupation, and to promote the right of self-determination for the Kashmiri and Palestinian people. It is essential to address the underlying causes of these conflicts, promote political solutions, and ensure the observance of international humanitarian law, and end the impunity for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Security Council can contribute to this by holding the perpetrators of war crimes accountable, by halting the supply of weapons to the perpetrators, by imposing political and legal consequences on the states and individuals responsible for these crimes, and by offering protection, including through UN peacekeepers, to the civilians suffering under the yoke of foreign occupation. Mr. President, the adoption of Resolution 2719 was an important milestone in building credible avenues for the protection of civilians, including through peace enforcement. We must build on this example of enforcement actions. Apart from political actions to resolve disputes, apart from reinforced legal mechanisms to ensure accountability, we must build the UN's capacity, together with relevant regional organizations, including the African Union, to enforce peace and uphold the protection of civilians in conflict zones, in accordance with the principles and norms of international law, in particular, international humanitarian law. Mr. President, Pakistan looks forward to working for these objectives within the Security Council and at the forthcoming Summit of the Future. I thank you, sir.